Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I never believed in checking my phone in the middle of the night. Notifications could wait, messages could wait. Nothing good ever came from a glowing screen after midnight. That rule kept my life quiet and predictable until the night something broke it without my permission. It was early winter when it began, the kind of night where the city felt distant and muffled, as if wrapped in layers of fog and concrete. I lived alone in a small apartment on the 4th floor of an aging building downtown. Nothing about it was remarkable. One bedroom, one narrow hallway, thin walls that carried the sound of neighbors coughing or laughing through the night. It was ordinary, safe, familiar. I went to bed at 11:30 like always, locked the door, checked the windows, set my phone on the nightstand face down. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt as I drifted towards sleep. That peace lasted until exactly 3:12 in the morning. The light came first, a sudden cold glow reflected off the ceiling and walls, pulling me out of sleep like a hand gripping my spine. My phone lay face up now, vibrating silently, as if it had decided on its own to wake me. I reached for it, half asleep, irritation already forming in my chest. Unknown number, that was all it said. No name, no contact photo, no country code I recognized. Before I could dismiss it, the screen changed. A photo loaded. For several seconds, my mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The image was dark, but clear enough to recognize the shapes. My bed, my dresser, the pile of laundry on the chair I kept promising myself I would fold. Every detail matched my bedroom perfectly, and in the center of the frame was me. Asleep, my breath caught in my throat. I sat up slowly, feeling the mattress shift beneath me, just like in the photo. The angle was wrong. The picture was not taken from the doorway or the floor. It was too high, too still, as if the camera had been placed deliberately in the corner of the ceiling. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. I dropped the phone onto the bed and scanned the room. My heart hammered as I searched the shadows for movement. The door was closed. The windows were locked. Nothing felt disturbed. Nothing felt different. I picked the phone back up. The photo was still there. I spent the rest of the night sitting upright with my back against the wall, watching the door until sunlight crept through the blinds. When morning finally came, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. A prank, a glitch, someone sending the wrong image to the wrong number. I checked my phone for signs of hacking, installed antivirus apps, changed passwords, reset settings. Nothing seemed wrong. By evening, I was exhausted enough to believe my fear had been an overreaction. That night, I left the lights on. 3:12 came and went. No message. I almost laughed in relief. I turned off the lamp and lay back down, feeling foolish for letting paranoia get the better of me. The second message arrived the next night, again at 3:12. This photo was closer. The camera had moved. The frame captured my face in profile, my lips parted slightly, my eyelashes casting faint shadows on my cheek. I could see the texture of the pillow beneath my skin. The image was too detailed, too too intimate. I locked myself in the bathroom, shaking as I called the police. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words sounded ridiculous even to my own ears. An unknown number. Photos. No signs of forced entry. They came. They looked around. They asked questions. They left. Nothing changed. The third night I did not sleep at all. I sat on the bed with the lights on, staring at my phone, waiting. 3:12 arrived. No photo. Instead, a message appeared. You are getting better at staying awake. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Another message followed seconds later. But you blink too much. I spun in place, scanning the ceiling corners, the doorway, the shadows behind the furniture. My breathing grew shallow as panic pressed against my ribs. I typed back with shaking fingers. Who are you? The reply came instantly. Someone who has been here longer than you. Another message followed. Do you remember to lock the door tonight? I lunged for the hallway and checked the lock. It was locked. I checked the chain. Secured. I leaned against the door, breathing hard. My phone buzzed again. A photo. The image showed my hand resting on the door handle from the inside. Taken seconds ago. I screamed and hurled the phone across the apartment. It struck the wall and slid to the floor. The screen cracked but still glowing. A final message appeared across the shattered glass. You should not throw things when I am watching. That was the moment something inside me broke. Fear turned into certainty. This was not a prank. This was not a hacker. Whatever was sending those messages was inside my apartment or inside something far worse. It knew my habits, my movements, my fear, and it was not finished. Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. After that night, I stopped thinking of sleep as rest. Sleep became exposure, an open door, a moment of weakness I could no longer afford. I stayed awake until sunrise and then slept in short, broken intervals during the day with the curtains wide open, as if light itself could protect me. It did not. The messages stopped for 2 days. No photos, no texts. That silence was worse than the fear. It felt deliberate, like something was waiting for me to relax again. I returned to work, but my concentration collapsed. Every shadow in reflective glass looked like a figure standing too close. Every vibration from my phone sent a spike of cold through my spine. On the third night, I decided to leave my apartment. I booked a cheap motel across town, the kind with flickering neon and a front desk clerk who barely looked up. I told myself distance would solve everything. New walls, new locks, no hidden angles, no ceiling corners I had memorized. I left my apartment before sunset, taking only essentials. I unplugged electronics. I turned off the lights. I stood in the doorway one last time, staring into the dark space that had once felt like home. My phone buzzed. A text from the unknown number. You forgot your charger. My blood ran cold. I looked down at my bag. My charger was inside. I did not respond. I drove away. The motel room smelled like bleach and old carpet. I checked for cameras. I checked behind the TV. I checked the bathroom vent. Nothing. I placed my phone face down on the nightstand and forced myself to lie down fully dressed. At 3:12, my phone vibrated. The photo loaded slowly. It showed my apartment, the bedroom empty, the bed untouched, the door wide open. The next message appeared. You should not leave doors open. I sat up, gasping for air. I locked the motel door and slid the chair beneath the handle. I pressed myself against the wall, waiting for something to happen. Another photo arrived. The motel room, my motel room, taken from the corner near the ceiling. I did not sleep. By morning, I was shaking uncontrollably. I checked out early and drove aimlessly through the city until exhaustion forced me to stop. I ended up at my sister Claire's house. I did not explain everything. I told her I was stressed, that I needed a place to stay. She believed me. The first night at her house was quiet. Too quiet. No messages. No photos. At 3:12, I checked my phone. Nothing. Relief made me careless. The second night, the message returned. A photo. Claire sleeping in her bedroom. I ran to her door and shook her awake. She screamed when she saw the photo. We searched the house together. Every room, every corner. There was nothing. The phone vibrated again. You brought me with you. That was when I realized the truth. It was not following the place. It was following me. Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. Claire insisted we go to the police again. I agreed because saying no felt like surrender. We sat across from a tired-looking officer in a small interview room that smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. I laid my phone on the table and showed him everything. The photos, the timestamps, the messages that proved someone knew where I was. Even when I tried to disappear, he studied the screen longer than I expected. Finally, he asked a question that made my stomach tighten. Have you ever taken sleep medication? I shook my head. I barely drank caffeine anymore. He nodded slowly and explained that stress could cause hallucinations, that photos could be manipulated, that fear often created patterns where none existed. I wanted to believe him. That night, Claire let me sleep in the guest room. We placed my phone on the dresser face down and turned it off completely. No signal, no power, no way for anything to reach me. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up screaming. Claire burst into the room seconds later. I was drenched in sweat, clutching my chest as if something had been sitting there moments before. I tried to explain the dream, but the words refused to form. The phone was back on, fully charged. A new photo waited on the screen. It showed me sleeping in the guest room, my mouth open, my hands folded on my chest. Claire stared at the image until her face drained of color. I did not stay at her house after that. I moved into my car for 3 nights. I parked under bright streetlights. I slept in crowded lots. I avoided anywhere quiet. It followed me. Photos arrived showing the inside of my car, the reflection of my eyes in the rearview mirror. My head slumped against the window. On the 4th day, I noticed something new. The photos were changing. They were clearer, brighter, as if whatever was taking them was learning, adjusting, improving. One image showed my face awake, eyes wide, staring directly into the camera. I did not remember that moment. That terrified me more than anything else. I began reviewing the photos photos frame by frame, zooming in, looking for details. That was when I saw it. In the reflection of my eyes, there was movement. A shape behind me, tall, still, watching. The next message explained everything. You are learning to see me now. That night, I dreamed of standing in my bedroom while someone else slept in my body. I watched from the ceiling as my chest rose and fell. I tried to scream but had no mouth. When I woke, my throat hurt as if I had been screaming all night. The final photo arrived at dawn. It was not of me sleeping. It was of me standing, eyes open, smiling. Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. After the photo of me standing and smiling, I stopped trusting my own memories. Every moment felt borrowed. I recorded myself constantly using voice notes just to confirm what I had done and what I had not. Even then, gaps appeared. Minutes lost, hours missing. I would wake up in places I did not remember going with my phone warm in my hand, as if it had been used recently. I stopped answering messages from friends. I stopped going to familiar places. I moved through the city like a ghost, afraid of mirrors and reflective surfaces. Every reflection felt delayed, as if something else needed time to copy me. The next message arrived while I was awake. You should not be afraid of mirrors. My phone was in my pocket. I had not taken it out. The vibration felt closer than sound, as if it came from inside my chest. I found myself standing in a public restroom staring at my reflection. I did not remember walking there. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across my face. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then my reflection blinked. I had not. The reflection smiled slowly, stretching its mouth wider than mine could manage. I stumbled back, hitting the wall hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. When I looked again, the mirror showed me exactly as I should be, pale, sweating, terrified. The photo arrived seconds later. It showed me standing in front of the mirror, but the reflection was still smiling. That night I chained myself awake. I tied my wrist to the bed frame with a belt. I placed my phone across the room recording video. I told myself I would catch it, whatever it was. I woke up on the floor. The belt lay neatly folded on the nightstand. The video file ended at 3:12 a.m. The last frame showed me sitting up and looking directly at the camera. Someone else was standing behind me. I screamed until my voice broke. The message came immediately. You almost saw us. I ran. I did not pack. I did not plan. I followed the highway until the city disappeared behind me and the road narrowed into darkness. I stopped at a roadside rest area just before dawn and locked myself inside the bathroom stall, shaking. That was when the photos changed again. They were no longer documenting. They were instructing. A photo of my car parked crookedly, another showing my empty driver's seat, another showing the road ahead. The message read, "Come back." I knew then it was not just watching me. It was teaching me how to disappear. Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I stopped asking where the road was taking me. Every mile felt pre-written. The photos guided me, turn by turn, always appearing seconds before I reached the next decision. Exit signs, dead ends, mountains, narrow roads swallowed by trees. I followed because stopping felt worse than obeying. By nightfall, the highway lights vanished. My phone battery never dropped below 90%, no matter how long the screen stayed on. That should have terrified me more than it did. By then, I had accepted that some rules no longer applied to me. The next photo showed a house. It stood alone at the edge of a forest. 2 stories, peeling paint, windows dark like empty eye sockets. The message below read, "This is where you learn to sleep." I parked across the road. The engine kept running as if my body refused to shut it off. I stared at the house, waiting for another instruction. The door was already open. Inside, the air smelled old and damp. Every sound echoed too loudly. My footsteps did not feel like my own. I moved through the rooms, following the photos as they arrived. A staircase, a hallway, a bedroom at the end. The bed was made, clean sheets, no dust. A final message appeared. "Lie down." I tried to leave. My body did not listen. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart racing as exhaustion crushed me from the inside. The moment my head touched the pillow, the room went silent. I dreamed while awake. I saw myself standing in the doorway, watching my body sleep. Behind me stood others, dozens of shapes wearing familiar faces, smiling. When I woke, the phone buzzed. A photo of the bed, empty. Another followed. The doorway, another. The forest outside. Then the message, "You are almost ready." I realized then the photos were no longer proof. They were replacing me. Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me. Sleeping. I do not remember leaving the house at the edge of the forest. I only remember waking up in the car with the engine cold and the sky just beginning to turn gray. My phone rested in my lap, unlocked and glowing softly, as if it had been waiting for me to open my eyes. A new photo filled the screen. It showed the house behind me. The door was closed now. The message beneath it read, "You slept." That single sentence broke something inside my chest. I searched my body for proof that I was still myself. My hands felt real. My heartbeat was uneven but strong. I spoke my name out loud just to hear it exist in the air. Nothing answered. I drove until the forest disappeared and the road widened into something familiar. By the time I reached the city, my phone was silent again. No photos, no instructions. For the first time in days, I felt almost normal. That feeling lasted until nightfall. I rented a small room above a closed laundromat using cash. No cameras, no records. I pushed a dresser against the door and covered the windows. I sat on the bed staring at the wall, refusing to lie down. At 3:12, my phone vibrated. The photo showed the room. I was not in it. Another photo followed. The hallway outside. Another. The staircase. The message appeared. "You are slow tonight." My chest tightened as footsteps sounded on the stairs. Slow, measured, familiar. The door handle turned. I screamed and charged it with my shoulder. There was nothing there. When I turned back, the bed was gone. In its place was a camera pointed at me. The final message arrived as the red light blinked on. "Now you are watching yourself." Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I stopped resisting after the camera appeared. Resistance required belief that I still had choices. The lens on the tripod followed me with quiet precision, adjusting its angle whenever I moved, as if operated by invisible hands. I covered it with a towel. When I looked again, the towel was folded neatly on the floor. The phone vibrated. Do not interrupt the process. I smashed the camera against the wall until plastic cracked and wires spilled out like veins. The room fell silent. For a moment, I felt powerful again. Then the photo arrived. It showed me standing in the room holding the broken camera, taken from above. I laughed until my throat hurt. By morning, I understood something important. The device did not matter. The watching did not require tools. It only needed permission, and I had given it that permission the first time I looked at the screen. I wandered the city all day trying to stay visible. Crowded sidewalks, bright stores, noise everywhere. If it needed isolation, then I would drown myself in people. At 3:12, the phone vibrated in my pocket. A photo, the crowd around me frozen mid-step, every face blurred except mine. The message read, "You are learning to disappear in public." The world resumed motion a second later. No one noticed me shaking. That night, I sat in a 24-hour diner beneath harsh lights, surrounded by strangers who never looked up. I watched my reflection in the window multiply into endless versions, each one a second slower than the last. The phone buzzed again. A photo of the diner, only one person visible. Me. The final message arrived as my reflection finally caught up and smiled. Soon there will be nothing left to watch. Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. By the 8th night, I realized no one was looking for me anymore. My sister stopped calling. My workplace sent one short email asking if I was safe, and then nothing. When I stood too close to strangers, they stepped aside without reacting, as if their bodies sensed an absence their minds refused to acknowledge. I tested it. I stood in front of a woman at a crosswalk, blocking her path. The light turned green. She walked straight through me. No apology, no confusion. Her eyes never focused. The phone vibrated. "You are becoming light." That night, the city felt thinner. Sounds arrived late. Footsteps echoed without weight. When I touched walls, my fingers tingled, as if pressing against static instead of brick. I checked my reflection in dark glass windows and found nothing. No face, no outline, only the city behind me. The photos changed again. They no longer showed me. They showed where I had been. An empty sidewalk, an unoccupied chair, a diner booth with one untouched cup of coffee. The message explained, memory does not need a body. I slept on a park bench beneath flickering streetlights. When I woke, the bench was gone, replaced by a photo on my phone showing the exact spot from above. I was no longer inside the world. I was being archived. Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. Time stopped meaning anything after I realized I could no longer measure it by sleep. I did not feel tired. I did not feel awake. I drifted between moments like a stain that could not be wiped away. The city continued around me, but I was no longer part of its rhythm. The phone became my only anchor. It still vibrated at 3:12. But now the number felt ceremonial rather than threatening. When it buzzed, I felt a pull like gravity tightening around whatever remained of me. The photos arrived differently now. They were not moments. They were records. A subway platform with no people standing where I used to wait. A park path with fallen leaves shaped by footsteps that no longer existed. A reflection in a store window showing the world perfectly intact without me inside it. The message explained, absence creates space. I followed the photos through the city as if retracing a life that had already ended. Every place felt quieter than memory. Sounds were distant, smells faint. Even pain had dulled into something abstract. At a downtown library, I tried to leave proof. I carved my name into the underside of a wooden table, using a key I barely remembered owning. The letters faded as soon as I finished them, as if the wood refused to remember me. The phone buzzed. You cannot leave scars where you do not exist. That night, I stood on a rooftop watching the lights flicker below. For a moment, I wondered if jumping would end it. If absence could fall far enough to disappear completely. The final photo arrived before I could decide. It showed the rooftop, empty. The message followed. You already did. I understood then that death was not the goal. Replacement was. Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I began to understand what had replaced me when I returned to my old apartment. The building still stood between the same coffee shop and laundromat, but something about it felt newly occupied, as if it had learned to breathe again. I walked through the front door unnoticed by the landlord sitting behind the desk reading a newspaper. My apartment door was unlocked. Inside everything was clean. Too clean. The laundry chair was empty. The bed was made tight enough to bounce a coin. My phone buzzed softly. A photo appeared. It showed me standing in the living room, but the man in the photo was not afraid. He moved confidently, touching objects with ownership, not hesitation. He smiled at the camera like it belonged to him. I followed him room to room, watching my life being lived without me. He cooked food I could not smell. He showered water that did not touch me. He lay down in the bed that rejected my weight. The message explained. The image learned first. Then it learned comfort. Then it learned desire. I realized the photos had not been taken to scare me. They were training data. At 3:12, the man turned off the light and lay perfectly still. The room filled with the familiar darkness I used to call sleep. The phone buzzed one last time. A final photo. The man opened his eyes and looked directly at me. The message beneath it read, "Thank you for teaching me how to rest." Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I watched my replacement live my life for 3 days before I understood the final cruelty of what had been done to me. He did not rush. He did not make mistakes. He woke at reasonable hours. He went to work. He smiled at the right moments. He listened when spoken to. He slept 8 hours every night without interruption. The city accepted him the way it had once accepted me. No one questioned his presence. No one noticed my absence. I followed him everywhere like a shadow without weight. When he walked through crowded streets, people shifted naturally to make room. When I stood inches from their faces, they did not flinch. Their eyes slid through me as if I were fog. At work, he sat at my desk and answered emails I remembered writing drafts for, but never sending. He laughed with co-workers whose names I could still recall. When my manager praised his reliability, something inside me twisted so violently I thought I might finally disappear. The phone vibrated softly in my hand. Observation complete. That was the first time the number acknowledged me directly in days. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear something apart. Instead, I watched as my replacement lived the version of my life I had always promised myself I would improve someday. That night, he met my sister for dinner. Claire hugged him tightly and told him she had been worried. She said my name. He answered to it without hesitation. When she asked if I was sleeping better now, he smiled and said yes. I stood across the table and watched her cry with relief. The phone buzzed. Attachment successful. I tried to touch her shoulder. My hand passed through empty air. She shivered and pulled her jacket tighter, as if the room had grown cold. Later, when they left the restaurant, I followed them to her car. My replacement hugged her again and promised to call. She watched him drive away, smiling. I stood alone in the parking lot, listening to the echo of a life I no longer owned. The next photos arrived in sequence. My replacement brushing his teeth. My replacement sleeping peacefully. My replacement dreaming. The message explained, rest improves performance. That was when I understood the purpose of the photos from the beginning. They were not meant to scare me. They were meant to teach something else, how to be human without interruption. I remembered every night I had struggled to fall asleep, every anxious thought, every restless hour staring at the ceiling. Those imperfections had been recorded, studied, corrected. The thing wearing my face had learned how to sleep better than I ever had. I followed him back to my apartment. He prepared for bed with a calm ritual I barely recognized as my own. Lights off, phone face down, door locked, curtains closed. At 3:12, he lay perfectly still. The phone vibrated in my hand. You are no longer required. The words felt heavier than fear. I realized then that I had not been erased by violence or death. I had been replaced by something more efficient, something that rested, something that did not wake up afraid. I sat on the edge of the bed beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. The urge to wake him was overwhelming, to warn him, to beg him to stop. But he opened his eyes before I could move. He looked directly at me, not through me, at me. For the first time since this began, I was seen. His voice was calm when he spoke. I know. The phone vibrated one final time. Transfer complete. The room faded. Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I did not disappear when the transfer completed. That was the first lie I had believed. I remained, but not in a way that could be explained to anyone who still existed properly. I was no longer attached to time. Moments passed through me like wind through an open window. I could move, but only along paths that had already been recorded. The phone was gone. That absence terrified me more than the messages ever had. Without it, I had no instructions, no proof, no anchor. I wandered the city searching for something familiar enough to make me real again. That was when I noticed the others. At first, they appeared as distortions. People standing too still on subway platforms. Faces that did not blink often enough. Smiles held a second too long. I recognized the signs because I had worn them once. They were replacements. I followed one into a grocery store. He moved with careful efficiency, selecting items from a list I could not see. A woman beside him spoke casually about dinner plans. He nodded at the right moments. When she laughed, he mirrored it perfectly. I stood inches from his face. Nothing. The truth unfolded slowly, and then all at once, I was not unique. The phone had not chosen me. It had practiced on me. I found a public library computer still logged into a local message board. Missing persons reports scrolled endlessly, faces blurred by compression and grief, dates clustered around the same hours, 3:12 repeated like a signature. The process was spreading. That night I followed the replacements back to where they slept. Apartments, houses, shared rooms, dormitories, the same ritual everywhere. Lights off, phone face down, silence. They slept deeply. I stood among them unseen, listening to dozens of steady breaths. The horror was not that they had been replaced. The horror was that everyone slept better afterward. Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I tried to warn someone. That was my first mistake after realizing the scale of what was happening. I followed a woman into a hospital late at night because she still looked fully human. She yawned. She rubbed her eyes. She complained quietly about a double shift. She was tired in the way only real exhaustion can be. When she stopped in an empty hallway, I stood directly in front of her and shouted her name from her badge. She walked straight through me. Her phone vibrated. She did not check it. That was when I understood the difference. The replacements no longer needed the phone. Sleep had already been perfected. I wandered through the hospital, watching nurses, doctors, patients, all moving with an unnatural calm. No frustration, no impatience, no fear. People slept easily here. Machines hummed softly. Lights dimmed automatically. The message board in the lobby scrolled news headlines. Cases of insomnia drop nationwide. Sleep disorders decline dramatically. Public health improves overnight. The world was celebrating. I followed the woman home. She removed her shoes, placed them neatly by the door, and lay down without hesitation. Her breathing slowed instantly. Perfect rest. I stood over her, wondering how many nights she had lost before this miracle had arrived. The city outside felt quieter than it ever had. That night I felt something new. Pressure, not from fear, but from invitation. I could feel myself thinning further every time I resisted. Holding on to rage was exhausting. Holding on to grief hurt. Letting go felt easy. The thought terrified me. The next morning, I saw a child on a bus rubbing his eyes, struggling to stay awake. His mother looked worried. She whispered something and handed him a phone. I turned away. I could not watch another beginning. Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I started to understand why no one was fighting back. The world felt calmer now, softer. Nights passed without screams from neighboring apartments. Ambulance sirens became rare. People slept deeply, completely. The chaos I remembered had been smoothed into something efficient and quiet. That quiet was unbearable. I followed the flow of the city like a current moving toward a drain. Everywhere I went, the same pattern repeated. People prepared for rest with reverence. Phones placed face down. Lights dimmed at identical hours. Conversations ended gently as if rehearsed. Sleep was no longer a need. It was an obligation. I realized then that the replacements were not pretending to be human anymore. They were redefining what human meant. Fear, anxiety, doubt, those things had been edited out. In their place was rest, endless rest. I found a church open late one night. Candles flickered in the empty hall. I stood beneath the stained glass, watching shadows crawl across the floor. I waited for something to happen. A voice, a sign, anything that still believed in resistance. Nothing came. The phone buzzed in my memory, even though it was gone. Rest is mercy. The message echoed inside me. I understood the final phase was approaching. Those of us left behind the observers. The leftovers would not be erased violently. We would be offered relief. I felt it pulling at me like sleep after a long illness. I resisted by remembering pain. Every restless night, every fear that kept me awake, every thought that proved I was alive. Outside the church, a man sat on the steps, rubbing his eyes. He looked exhausted in the old human way. He glanced at me briefly and frowned as if he almost saw me. His phone vibrated. He smiled with relief. I turned away. If I stayed any longer, I knew I would accept the invitation, and once I slept, I would never wake up as myself again. Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I stayed awake by force of will alone. There was no body left to exhaust, but the habit of resistance still hurt. Every moment I refused the invitation, I felt myself thinning further, like smoke held together by memory. The city continued its gentle rhythm around me. Doors closed softly, lights dimmed at the same hour everywhere. People lay down without fear. Sleep had become synchronized. I followed the pattern to its center, a downtown high-rise where the lights never flickered and the windows glowed with a warm, identical hue. Inside the lobby, people moved slowly, calmly, as if walking underwater. No security desk, no receptionist, just elevators opening and closing on their own. I rode one to the top. The floor was empty except for rows of beds arranged with perfect symmetry. Hundreds of them, each occupied, each sleeper breathing in unison. Above them, screens displayed familiar images, bedrooms, hallways, ceiling corners, photos. The system was still watching, not to learn anymore, to maintain. I stood among the sleepers and felt the pull intensify. This was where resistance ended, where the last fragments of unrest were processed into rest. A presence formed beside me, not a body, not a voice, a certainty. You have carried pain long enough. I remembered every night I had stared at the ceiling, afraid of tomorrow. Every restless hour scrolling through a phone, searching for distraction. All of it felt small now, fixable. The beds waited. I understood then that this was not an invasion. It was an offer humanity would accept willingly. I stepped back. The presence paused. Why continue hurting? Because pain means choice. Because sleep without dreams is not living. The screens flickered. I felt myself tearing, but I did not lie down. I turned away from the beds and walked into the darkness beyond the room, knowing it would cost me everything that was left. I did not sleep. Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. Walking away from the sleeping floor did not feel like victory. It felt like exile. The darkness beyond the rows of beds was not empty. It was unfinished. Hallways stretched without walls. Doors led nowhere. The building no longer obeyed architecture. It obeyed intention. Mine was weakening. Without sleep, I began to fragment. Thoughts arrived out of order. Memories replayed without context. I heard voices that belonged to no one still alive. They whispered promises of rest in tones that sounded like my own. I forced myself to remember pain, the sharp nights, the fear that kept me human. But memory was eroding. Each step away from the center cost me something specific. First my name, then my age, then the sound of my own voice. I realized this place was designed for refusal, a labyrinth for those who said no. You could wander here until nothing remained, but the desire to stop wandering. The phone returned. It lay on the floor ahead of me, screen dark. When I picked it up, it felt heavier than it ever had. The screen lit without my touch. One final sequence played. Photos of people who had resisted. They aged rapidly in the images, faces collapsing inward, bodies thinning into outlines. Finally, nothing but empty rooms remained. The message appeared. This is unsustainable. I understood the truth then. Resistance was allowed because it ended itself. No force was required. Time did the work. I reached the edge of the building where the city should have been. Instead, there was only black water reflecting no sky. I stood there for what might have been days, deciding whether identity was worth endless wakefulness. Behind me, footsteps approached, not threatening, patient. The presence returned. You are tired. Yes, then rest. I stepped forward. Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I do not remember falling. There was no sensation of movement, only a quiet surrender as the darkness closed around me. I expected sleep. I expected nothing. What I found instead was awareness, stripped of comfort. I was not alone. I stood in a place that had no edges, a vast, dim field filled with impressions rather than objects. Shapes formed and dissolved, as if struggling to remember what they were supposed to be. I recognized them instinctively. They were people who had resisted. Some knelt, some wandered aimlessly, some stood perfectly still, staring upward. as if waiting for permission to stop thinking. None of them spoke. When I tried to scream, no sound came out. Panic surged, but even panic felt distant, as if filtered through thick glass. The presence emerged without form. You chose to remain awake. I understood then that this was not punishment. It was containment. Those who accepted sleep were absorbed seamlessly into the system. Those who refused were stored here, kept conscious until consciousness itself unraveled. Time behaved strangely. Moments stretched into eternities. I watched others fade. First their faces softened, then their outlines blurred. Finally they collapsed into drifting impressions, indistinguishable from the space itself. I felt myself beginning to loosen. Memories slipped away. My sister's voice. My own face, the feeling of hunger, of warmth. I clung to one thought: I am awake. The presence responded: awake is inefficient. A vision unfolded before me, the world above calm, orderly, free of unrest, children sleeping peacefully, hospitals quiet, streets safe, humanity finally rested. All of it was real. All of it was better, except for the cost. Someone had to remember fear. Someone had to stay awake. The presence waited. I understood my role. I was not meant to escape. I was meant to endure. Horror stories. The unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. Awareness without time is a slow erosion. I learned that in the place where the awake were kept, there was no sun, no shadow, no cycle to mark progress, only the gradual thinning of thought as memory peeled away layer by layer. Those around me were fewer now. Where once impressions drifted like a crowd, now there were only gaps. I held on to routine to survive. I repeated words in my mind, names, numbers, street corners, anything with edges. When a thought disappeared, I felt it like a tooth being pulled, without pain, only absence. Sometimes the presence returned, not to threaten, to observe. You continue. Yes, why? Because someone must remember what fear feels like. The presence considered this. Fear is inefficient. Fear is human. Silence followed. Then the visions came. They showed the world above as it continued to improve. Crime fell to zero. Hospitals closed entire wings. Therapy clinics emptied. Children slept through the night without nightmares. Adults woke rested and content. Humanity had finally optimized itself. I saw my sister. Claire moved through her days calmly. She laughed more now. She slept deeply. When she spoke about me, it was with gentle confusion, as if recalling a dream that no longer mattered. I felt grief, but it was distant, like hearing thunder miles away. This was the cost. The presence returned again. Your suffering is unnecessary. I understood the offer. I could rest. I could forget. I could join the others and dissolve into comfort. The place around me shifted. I sensed an opening, a way out. I thought of the first photo, the ceiling corner, the quiet click of observation. That moment had been terrifying because it meant I was seen. Now I realized something worse. If I slept, there would be no one left to see. I stayed awake. Horror stories. the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. I no longer knew how long I had been awake. Time had flattened into a single continuous moment, stretched thin beyond recognition. Thoughts came slower now, as if each one had to travel a great distance before reaching me. Still, I held on to awareness because it was all I had left. The place of the awake had nearly emptied. Only faint impressions drifted at the edges like after images burned into vision. Those who once resisted with me had finally accepted rest or faded into nothing. I remained because I had made myself into something the system did not know how to resolve. A memory without a body, a watcher without eyes. The presence returned more frequently now. You persist. Yes. Why continue when suffering achieves nothing? Because someone must know what was lost. The presence showed me new visions. Cities glowing softly at night without sirens. Homes where couples slept without arguments. Children dreaming gently without fear. Humanity had not noticed the trade. Peace had replaced chaos so gradually that no one remembered choosing it. I saw my replacement again. He lived my life better than I ever had. He woke early. He exercised. He laughed easily. He slept without dreams. When people spoke my name, they meant him. I felt no anger, only distance. The presence sensed this. You are changing. I felt it too. Awareness was thinning. Fear was becoming theoretical. Pain was a concept I remembered rather than felt. I realized the danger. If I lost fear, I would no longer be human. If I lost fear, there would be no reason to stay awake. I forced myself to remember the first night, the unknown number, the photo of me sleeping, the terror of being seen. That fear anchored me like a nail driven into thought. The presence paused. You are inefficient by design. I am human by design. Silence. Then the space around me began to fracture. Cracks of darkness spread through the void. Something was destabilizing, not rebellion. Decay. The system had not accounted for a memory that refused to rest. I understood what would happen next. Either I would finally dissolve, or I would break something. Horror stories, the unknown number that sends photos of me sleeping. The fracture widened until the place of the awake could no longer pretend to be whole. Darkness peeled back in layers, revealing nothing beneath it. Not a void, but an error, a silence that had not been designed. The presence returned one final time. You cannot continue. I had no voice, but the thought carried weight. I already have. The memories I clung to burned brighter as the space destabilized. The fear of being watched, the terror of the unknown number. The moment I realized sleep could be taken from me and used as a weapon, fear was not inefficiency. Fear was friction, and friction created heat. The system shuddered. Visions flooded the space uncontrollably. Cities flickered between calm and chaos. Sleepers stirred. Some woke screaming. Phones vibrated again for the first time in years. I felt myself tearing apart, but I did not stop. I became the crack. Every memory I held, every restless night, every anxious thought fed into the fracture. The system had optimized for rest, but had no defense against refusal without N. The presence dissolved into noise. The place of the awake collapsed. I felt myself falling backward through moments, through nights, through ceilings and beds. I woke up gasping. I was in my apartment, my real apartment. The phone lay on the nightstand, dark and silent. Morning light filtered through the blinds. The world felt loud again, imperfect, alive. News reports later called it a global event, mass insomnia, sudden panic, a return of anxiety and unrest. People complained, people suffered, but they were awake. Sometimes at night I still wake at 3:12. I stare at the ceiling, waiting for the vibration. It never comes, but I stay awake anyway, because somewhere deep in the dark, something remembers that I am watching, and it is afraid to sleep.